I'm Reea. I'm a life and relationship coach and an intuitive empath. This video is going to be about the reasons why women go back to abusive relationships. Put my hand up. I've done it. Have you? You might have gone back to a narcissist, a psychopath, or even somebody who was physically abusive towards you. So, one of the first reasons why women go back to abusive relationships is because they love the person they're in relationship with. You know, there's something really compelling about what narcissists and psychopaths do at the beginning of relationships. They love bomb you. They turn themselves into your perfect partner. So they listen very carefully to everything that you say. They hang on your every word, and wow, isn't that powerful? If you've had relationships before where they don't listen to you at all and they just want to talk at you all the time, then suddenly being in a relationship with a handsome, charming person who loves doing all of the things that you love doing and totally focuses on you and looks deep into your eyes and tells you how amazing you are and how much they love you, yeah, that sucks us in. The next reason we go back is trauma bonding. When you have a situation where you are intermittently reinforced in a relationship, that is more powerful than when you are reinforced all the time. So let me explain that. It's a psychological term, intermittent reinforcement. So what it means is that if someone is kind to you and good to you and reinforcing and totally loving towards you all of the time, that's not as powerful a reinforcer of your response to them as when they are really nice to you one day and really cold or awful to you the next. Yeah, I know it's weird, but that's human behavior. And if you had a dysfunctional childhood, if you were emotionally, psychologically, or physically abused in your childhood, it's highly likely that your brain has wired around trauma bonding and that is what is comfortable for you. So that's that thing that if we've been brought up in a family, a dysfunctional family, and we've been intermittently reinforced, so, okay, we don't get any attention from the parent, or we get emotionally or psychologically abused, and then every now and again they give us a hug or a cuddle and tell us how wonderful we are, then, you know, we're always going for that doggy treat. You know, we're always trying to get that hug or that cuddle, and so it's more powerfully reinforcing of our response to them. So in relationships with narcissists and psychopaths, intermittent reinforcement is a big deal. Trauma bonding is a big deal. So you want to fix the bad things. You want to solve the problems so that you can get back to the happily ever after all the time. That's trauma bonding. The third reason why we go back to abusive relationships, and I say we because I've done it, is spiritual bypassing. Being too nice, too forgiving, too naive, having too much sympathy for their story. So what that effectively means is feeling more sorry for them and what they've been through that we feel has caused their bad behaviour than we feel sorry for ourselves and what they're putting us through. We're putting somebody else before ourselves and we're being naive. You know, some people want to believe that there's no such thing as evil in the world. And yeah, I used to believe that. I really, really did. And I used to say that. I don't believe evil really exists. It's just wounded people. Well, maybe that's true. Maybe they are just wounded people and I can have compassion for them, but that doesn't mean to say I want to be in relationship with them, I want to fall in love with them, or I want them in my life. You know, as adults, we have the choice about healing ourselves. I was a wounded child. I have complex post-traumatic stress disorder. I've been on a healing path for most of my life, well, most of my adult life. So it's possible to heal. It is possible. And you have to do the work. And people who hang on to their woundedness just refuse to do the work. They often have very little insight into themselves. They refuse to take responsibility. It's so much easier to blame other people for what's going on in your life that's not working than it is to take responsibility for yourself. So spiritual bypassing is a big deal. Reason number 4 why people go back to abusive relationships is codependency. Not everyone who goes back to an abusive relationship or is in relationship with a narcissist or a psychopath is codependent, right? I want to get that right out there. There was a time when psychologists thought that that was true. Everyone that was in a relationship with someone who was abusive was codependent. It's not true. If you wonder if you're codependent, I think you have to look at the life you have between relationships. How comfortable are you in your own space? Are you able to take care of yourself and be happy when you're not in a relationship? So codependent people are only happy when they're in a relationship, and they tend to panic and spiral down when they're not in a relationship, and they'll quickly try and find someone to be in a relationship with, and they're often not all that choosy about who that person is. If you're someone that's had relationships and you've had big gaps between your relationships of like a year or 18 months or longer, then yeah, you're probably not codependent. But codependence is a reason. Now, codependence starts from childhood trauma, right? Codependent people have had traumatic childhoods. They feel unsafe when they're on their own. Deep down, they don't feel very good about themselves, and they don't think that they can cope with life on their own, and that they're only as worthy as the feedback they get from other people around them. They usually have shaky self-esteem and low confidence, and they need to be in relationship in order to feel safe. So it's really hard to deal with that. In order to get over codependence, you have to deal with your childhood trauma. You have to heal from that childhood trauma so that you're not codependent anymore and you can take care of yourself. And only then is it the right time to go into a relationship and choose to be in a relationship with someone, when you know that you're not in it because you feel safe when you're out of it, and that you can hold your own, you do have firm boundaries, you can take care of yourself and make good choices for yourself. So reason number 5 is what I'm going to call the myth of the weak woman. There's a great book written by American relationship researcher John Gottman from the Gottman Institute. The Gottman Institute have a love lab where they would bring couples in and put them in this flat over the weekend that just, looked like any other flat, but it had one-way windows so that the researchers could watch them and measure their responses without the couple really knowing everything about being watched. I mean, obviously they knew they were being watched, but so they'd leave them in this love lab for a few days and they'd be watched, and they found out lots of information about relationships, which is really powerful. Their book, so John Gottman's book, When Men Batter Women, is a really good one. He's got a lot of great relationship books out, and I highly suggest that if you're interested in this stuff, that you read them. In the book, When Men Batter Women, they say that it is an absolute myth that women that are in abusive relationships are weak and powerless. When you're in an abusive relationship, people from the outside go, why don't you just leave him? And it's a lot more complicated than that. What John Gottman actually says is that the women that are in relationship with abusive men are often heroines. They are strong and resourceful. They usually manage to be in these abusive relationships while at the same time keeping the house running, looking after the children, and trying to nurture and understand their man. So they're not weak. And just because you go back to a relationship that is abusive doesn't mean you're weak. It may mean that you're misguided. It may mean that you have some beliefs that aren't in your highest good, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're weak. So if you're in an abusive relationship and you keep getting these messages from everybody outside of you that you should just leave, and how could you be so powerless, then perhaps you start to think of yourself as being powerless and you go back. Reason number 6 about why women go back to relationships with abusers is fear. John Gottman, in his book, When Men Batter Women, says that this fear is not ungrounded. women are at very high risk of being harmed and injured when they leave relationships with abusive men. Their chances of getting seriously hurt in the first 2 years after they leave the relationship are extraordinarily high. You know, women get killed. Women get severely injured by these men. They can even hurt the children, harm the children. So it's the fear is not ungrounded. The fear is very, very, very real. And if they have been trauma bonded to their abuser and they've been gaslighted and manipulated and lied to over a long period of time, then their own resources are depleted. They end up with low self-esteem and low confidence. The abuser might have been telling them for years that they're stupid and that they can't survive on their own. And so fear is a big reason why women go back. Often when women leave, the behaviour of the abuser escalates, and it's all very well to say, oh, you can take a restraining order out against him. If any one of you have ever done that, and you know the consequences of that, I'd like to hear from you. You might leave me a comment about it, because my own story about that is that I've been to court and I've got AVOs against men that I was trying to get away from who wouldn't leave me alone. And one of them, I remember being in court and the police lady saying to me, he is not going to stop, and when he contacts you, the first time he contacts you again, you need to let us know, because I'm telling you now, this is not going to stop him. And she was right. The very next day, after we'd been to court, he emailed me. And he said, I know what the court order says, but you and I need to keep in touch with each other. And so I'm going to keep messaging you. And he kept sending me text messages before he went to sleep at night saying, good night, darling. And text messages in the morning saying, good morning, my sweetheart. And it was creepy. I mean, this guy had been stalking me for a period of 8 months after we'd broken up and wouldn't leave me alone. So I contacted the police. The police went and arrested him. And his flatmate, who was a friend of mine while we were in relationship, and, you know, this guy had moved in with this friend after we'd broken up, he was furious with me because the police had gone around to his door at 6 o'clock in the morning and banged on his door and arrested this man. And the next time I saw this friend, he tore strips off me. He you know, was really angry with me. And he said to me, how could you do that? Get the police to come around to my house at 6 o'clock in the morning. And I was like, I was flabbergasted. Like, he had no idea how frightened I was and what I had been through. I got to the point where I was too scared to leave the house. I wasn't frightened this man was going to hurt me. It wasn't physical abuse, but it was psychological and emotional abuse. And it's terrifying. It really is. So women go back out of fear, because in that first period after they leave their partner, it can be too much. It could be overwhelming. And so sometimes you convince yourself that going back, oh, they'll change, or they promise to go into counselling or something, they'll change, and you go back. Sometimes that's the easier path and the less fearful one. The seventh reason why women sometimes go back to abusive relationships is because of money. Abusive men very often take control of the finances, keep the woman poor. They can lovingly encourage you to leave your job because they just want to take care of you. And then when you've got no money, they start, you know, using it as power over you and keep you poor so that you can't leave them. Because, you know, at the core, a lot of abusive men are terrified of abandonment. So if they keep you poor and you can't leave them, then that serves their purposes. So if you have been in an abusive relationship, you may have no money of your own. You may have no job. You may have nowhere to go. You might not have a car even, you know. Sometimes they'll take the car away from you or say, that you can't take that car's mine. You've got nothing. And if you've got children, then being poor means not being able to take care of your children, not being able to support them. So maybe you can't do that, you know. Because abusive men often isolate, the women they're in relationships with as well. You may have nowhere to go. You may have no one to go to. Maybe he's managed to isolate you from all of your friends and family, and they've turned their backs on you, because people do that. I've had people turn their back on me who were friends because I chose to stay in a relationship with someone that was abusive. They simply stopped talking to me. No compassion. Well, if you're going to choose to stay there, they think, then I can't deal with this, so, you're cut off. And that happens to a lot of women. Number 8 reason why women return to abusive relationships is their fear of losing their children or their concern for their children. So sometimes an abusive man can be abusive in secret. He may not do it in front of the children. It's my belief that if that were true, children always know, because they're unconsciously reading the energy or the vibe in the house, and they know what's going on between mum and dad. But very often abusive men only abuse behind closed doors, so everybody else may think this is a good guy, and they may be stunned to hear about the things that he actually does to his family. Abusive men threaten women with taking their children away from them. You'll never see the children again. They try and turn the children against the mother. And, that doesn't always work out well. You might think to yourself, oh, you just go to court and the court, gives you custody of the children and blah, 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 blah. That sounds all very well in theory, but in practice it doesn't always work. And I have spoken to women who have lost custody of their children, and because they don't have the financial resources, or he's used some other bullshit to belittle them in the eyes of the court, and they have lost custody of their children, and they only have them every second weekend or on holidays or whatever. And children can be easily manipulated. I mean, if you're with a psychopath or a narcissist and they're incredibly charming and they lie and they manipulate and they know the right things to say, that works really effectively on kids. Often abusive men tell the children sob stories and try and make out like the woman is the bad person, and they get the children to feel sorry for them, and mum's being a bitch, and kids believe that. It doesn't matter how good a mother you are. Sometimes manipulators manage to turn the children against the mother. So losing your children, or perhaps, he's a good dad and he's a good provider and he's actually spending time with the kids and appears to be doing some of the right things with the kids. And so often women don't want to interfere in the relationship between the child and their father. It's a big thing to break up a family. And we know that 50% of all relationships end up in divorce, and 75% of them the divorce is initiated by the woman. So, women have to take responsibility for breaking up families, and it's not something that I've seen any woman do casually. I'm generalizing. There are women that do it casually. Maybe the woman's a narcissist, and and she's self-absorbed and she only cares about herself. And she tells herself stories that make it okay. But, most women are able to put their children before themselves. And so, they'll often sacrifice themselves for their children. My number 9 reason why women sometimes go back to abusive relationships or stay in them is self-esteem and self-confidence. Manipulative relationships abusive relationships do a lot of damage. If you're interested in a kind of insight into that damage, I'll leave a link to my other video, The Damage Narcissists Do. You might want to take a look at that. But when you have been in relationship with an abusive partner for a long time, it does fuck with your head. And it does diminish your sense of self. It does make you doubt yourself. It can completely strip away your sense of self-esteem and your self-confidence. So someone with no self-confidence and no self-esteem might be more susceptible to the manipulations of the narcissist or psychopath or abusive partner when they are being hooked back in, because that's something that narcissists are very good at. They're good at hooking you back in. They're good at telling you what you want to hear and showing remorse and telling you they feel guilty and they're going to change and all of that stuff. Number 10, a lot of people who've been in abusive relationships have post-traumatic stress disorder, and it can be complex post-traumatic stress disorder. You may have complex post-traumatic stress disorder from an abusive childhood. So what does that mean? It means that the symptoms of PTSD are depression, anxiety, a feeling of being numb to the world, a loss of joy, low coping strategies or low functioning. You may have flashbacks, you may have nightmares, you may have difficulty sleeping, so you're tired all the time. So if you've got PTSD and you're dealing with all of those things, you're exhausted, you're tired, you're not functioning well. And to have to leave an abusive relationship and establish yourself again and establish a new home and take care of children and start your life all over again, it's huge. And sometimes it's overwhelming and just too much. Number 11 is fix-it syndrome. So, as I said before, a lot of women who are in abusive relationships, and men for that matter, it doesn't have to be just women, but most abusive relationships, women and children are the victims. You may be really focused and have been really focused for a long time on problem solving, on fixing the relationship. And usually the victim of abuse has taken way too much responsibility, in fact all the responsibility, for keeping the relationship alive and fixing it. So if you've been really invested in fixing the relationship for a long time, you may have gone to counselling, gone to workshops, read a million books, worked really hard on changing yourself. And you may have seen that it does create some change in the relationship. So you can see that perhaps, you know, your partner is capable of change and that some things have changed. I remember in one relationship I had, he showed absolutely no jealousy for the first 6 months in the relationship. So we went out a lot and I was just completely natural. I had a lot of friends. I had a lot of male friends. I didn't see those male friends when he wasn't there, but if we went out and I ran into them, I'd give them a hug, kiss on the cheek, say, hi, how you going? Meet my new fella. This went on for 6 months and I thought, oh, isn't this wonderful? Because I'd had abusive relationships before and I knew that one of the number one, red flags was jealousy. And I thought, oh my God, finally I'm in a relationship with someone who's not jealous. This is so lovely. I'm so loving this. After 6 months, he hit me with it. And of course, by then I was already in love with him. He'd stored up all of the stories of all the men whose cheeks I had kissed. And in a fight one night, he hit me with the whole thing, metaphorically. He didn't hit me physically. He recalled every incident, and he told me that I didn't realise how wrong I'd been, that I shouldn't be kissing these men on the cheek, that they were taking it the wrong way. And I didn't understand how many of them just wanted to have sex with me. And I was bamboozled, but then there was a long period of the relationship where he was really, really jealous, and we broke up. And then I remember getting back together with him, and he'd let go of his jealousy, not without a lot of hard work on my part, but I'd managed to solve that problem in the relationship. I thought, he's not jealous anymore. Little did I know that one of the reasons that he could stop being jealous was that he'd proven to himself his power over me. He'd proven that we could be broken up for a long period of time. And in that long period of time, I didn't date. I didn't fall in love with somebody else. I remained true to him, even though we weren't together. I hadn't managed to move on. I was still very caught up in the relationship. And so when we got back together, he didn't need to be jealous because he knew he had me. So if your story is similar to that, you've put a lot of energy into fixing the relationship and you feel like you've made some headway, there's something in us that just doesn't want to stop. There's something in us that doesn't want to let go. You think to yourself, oh, I've put 5 years or I've put 10 years into this relationship and I know that it's getting better. I don't want to give up all the gains that I've made. I see the potential this relationship has. I know that it's possible for us to be happy together, so I want to keep working on it. Fix-it syndrome. Reason number 12 why we go back to abusive relationships. Because to some of us, unfortunately, violence, emotional and psychological abuse are normal in relationships. They could have been normal in our dysfunctional family of origin. If you were brought up in a family where you watched your father emotionally, psychologically or physically abuse your mother, or maybe you were beaten, emotionally and psychologically abused by one or both of your parents, then this is normal. You have no concept that that isn't love, that relationships don't have to be like that, that they shouldn't be like that, that that is abnormal. So you think that's just the way life is. And so if you think that it's normal and that every now and again men lose control and hit their women, or that it's normal to have someone screaming at you, calling you names, criticizing you and dragging you down when they get angry or you've done something they don't like, you're more prone to put up with it. Number 13, the belief that your partner would be happy if. And I'm pretty sure that everyone in abusive relationships does this. They would be happy if I didn't say that thing that I said, or I worked harder to be a better partner. If only I did the things that they need. If I let them have control of the money. If I stopped going out with my friends. If I cut off all my male friends and never had anything to do with them anymore. If I stopped going to dance class. If I kept the house cleaner. If. We sometimes think that they would be happy if they had counselling. They worked on their childhood wounds. You know, we feel sorry for their story. Oh, the poor thing, they had a terrible mother, or they had a terrible father, or they were abused sexually, or whatever. You know, the thing that they know about couples counselling is that it is the absolute wrong thing to do if you're in a relationship with someone who's physically abusive. That in couples therapy, the men just often get angrier and then you cop it when you go home. I've had that experience. It was bad. I managed to get my partner to go to couples counselling with me, and I could see him getting angrier and angrier throughout the session. And at the end of the session, the counsellor waved us goodbye, but I had to go home with him, and it was terrifying. I knew I was going to cop it. Sometimes, and I've had this happen to me too, the couples counsellor implies that you have 50% of the responsibility equally in the relationship. And of course, your abuser just loves that shit. They love for someone to side with them and even just imply or infer that you are somehow at fault. And that is never the case in physically abusive relationships, right? Never, ever, ever. So I would not recommend that anyone in a physically abusive relationship go to couples counselling with their partner unless he had shown that he was able to not physically abuse for at least 2 years. Then you can think, okay, he's in control and he's got the message that physical abuse with you is not okay, and then you might be able to go into couples counselling with him. So don't fall into that trap of believing that he would be happy if only you did something different, or you took him to counselling, or whatever the story is. There's always a story. There's always a story. And number 15, I've left this one to last because it is to me the most important one. I think this is the one that women have so much trouble conquering, and it is holding on to the dream of how your life in this relationship could be. You know, we have romantic notions. It's really common when you get into a relationship with an abuser that he creates a scenario in the beginning when he's love bombing you that makes you think that he's your soulmate. Yep, I've fallen into that trap. So when you're holding on to a dream about how this relationship can be, and you just want to be loved, and you just want to be in a happy relationship, and you just want to have a home and your children and your friends come over for dinner, there's nothing wrong with wanting that. Yeah, being in a relationship can bring all sorts of good stuff with it. You've got someone to be with on holidays, you've got someone to travel with, you've got someone to cuddle you in bed at night, you have someone to lean on emotionally, hopefully, if it's a healthy relationship. You have someone to go to family do's with. You have someone to go out with. There's lots of good stuff. That's what we want. We all want that good stuff. And if you've been on your own and you suddenly find, and you've had a few shitty relationships, and you suddenly find your soulmate, and he's handsome and he's charming and he's focused on you and he says all the right things, it feeds the dream. It feeds the romantic dream that women often have. There's nothing wrong with having that dream. We've all got it. We all know that the potential for relationships to make us happy is there. It's just that, unfortunately, sometimes they don't. And we have to learn to be really discerning and use our judgment, not be naive and innocent, and watch for the red flags early on in the relationship. And when we see those red flags, get out really quick. I'm going to do another video on what those red flags are, and I'll leave the link here, and you can come back and click on that later and check it out. So holding on to the dream about how the relationship could be is a big one. It's hard to let go of that dream. I think that's big for everybody who goes through separation or divorce or the end of a relationship. There's a time of grief where we grieve the loss of that dream at the end. I really hope you've enjoyed this video. I'd love to hear from you. Please leave me a comment below, and don't forget before you leave to like and subscribe for more videos like